A couple weeks ago, 22 SNES games were datamined from the NES Nintendo Switch online app, as well as 4 emulators, 2 of which were the same as the NES and Super NES classic mini consoles. It seems likely that the SNES is coming, as well as 2 other consoles, to the online service. I wanted to discuss why this is super exciting and what it means for the online service in the upcoming year. First, let me be clear and say that I do not have the online subscription, not because I am boycotting it, but because for me it wasn't worth the price. I don't care for the NES games, and the only game I really played online was Splatoon. I used up my 7-day free trial, and then I felt fine not continuing my subscription. With the SNES and other consoles on the horizon though, I'm starting to change my mind. So let's first start with discussing what the SNES games means for the service, if they are actually coming. For me, these games are far more worth the price than the NES games, just for the fact that they have more content and we haven't seen them re-released as often as the NES games. Especially if the price doesn't change, this instantly makes the service a much better deal. More games for the same price is obviously a better deal. Also, what's really cool about the games that we have in the list here, which I'll show up on the screen, is that there are a lot of cool multiplayer games that would be awesome to play online. Like Super Mario Kart, for example, would be really fun. But just the games in general for me are just more worth the price. You have Yoshi's Island, Kirby's Dream Course, Star Fox, Contra 3, Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Kirby's Dream Land 3, Pilot Wings, F-Zero, Super Mario All-Stars, etc, etc, etc. All these games are just way more interesting to me than the NES games that I've played a million times. Now, what's also really cool is that 4 emulators were also found in the code. 2 we already know because they are the same emulators found in the NES and SNES classic editions. However, the other 2 are up to speculation. And I know a lot of people are speculating that this is going to be GameCube and Nintendo 64, but you know, for me, obviously that would be amazing, but I'm not feeling that that's what's going to happen. I really think it's going to be a Game Boy Color as one emulator, and then Game Boy Advance as the other. And the big reason I see for this is that for N64 and GameCube games, number one, I think they're still worth too much to include in the service. I think Nintendo could still look to remaster a lot of these old games for one, and secondly, the games are just too large, I think, for this kind of service. N64 games are probably fine. GameCube games can go from a gig to more than that. And if you start adding, 2, 3, 4, 5 games for each of those, I mean, we're looking at, 5 to 10 gigabytes just there. So I don't know how that's going to work when the Switch only has 32 gigabytes. Obviously, a lot of people have SD cards at this point, but as a service, it just doesn't make sense if you're going to have to keep deleting and installing the games that you want to play. So I think Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance makes a lot more sense. Now, if they do bring over Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, there's a lot of cool games they could bring. For Game Boy and Game Boy Color, we have Pokemon Red and Blue, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, Kirby's Dream Land, Zelda Oracle of Ages and Seasons, Link's Awakening, and more. We have, for Game Boy Advance, maybe Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, Mario Kart Super Circuit, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, Zelda Minish Cap, Golden Sun, Metroid Fusion, and more. There's so many good games in that library that they could bring over that is just so exciting to me. Again, Nintendo 64 and GameCube games would be super cool, I just don't see that happening. But Game Boy and Game Boy Advance is still super exciting as well. And also, in turn, with all this happening, I think we're really going to see the Switch online service evolve into 2019. I think there are big things coming this year in terms of that service. Back in, I want to say, October or November of 2018, the president of Nintendo, Furukawa, had an interview with his investors, and one of the quotes by Furukawa, this is what he had to say. "We think Nintendo Switch Online had a good launch, but the service has only just begun, so we have no plans to disclose any current subscriber ratios or number of subscribers at this time. Our objective for launching the service is to bring more games, more features, more fun to Nintendo Switch. Our focus at this point is on boosting the appeal of the service. We need to further enhance the content of the service for the subscriber base to reach a certain size. So that is what we are working on, with the understanding that the time it will take to do so will be measured in years." Now, this quote is very interesting because what this is saying is they are, number one, not happy with the number of people that are subscribed to the service right now. If they're not willing to disclose what the current subscriber ratios are, and they're saying that they need to boost the appeal of the service, obviously this means that they don't have enough people subscribed to the service right now. They want more people to buy into it. Now, the other interesting part of it is he's saying that we need to further enhance the content of the service for the subscriber base to reach a certain size. So what they're working on is trying to boost and enhance this service and make it more worth the money. And he also adds that the time it will take will be measured in years. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to take 2 or 3 years for it to change. I think what that means is that in the coming year or two, they're going to start trying to bolster that service. And the SNES games is a great way to start this. And if they add Game Boy or N64 or GameCube or whatever those other emulators are going to be, it's only going to make it even better. Now, what does this mean though in terms of how the service will change? I think what would be really cool, which I don't know if this is going to happen, but it would be awesome if Nintendo could do some sort of Game Pass thing with their retro games, right? So maybe they can break off the Nintendo Switch online service and the retro game so that there's 2 different parts or 2 different tiers of the service. So on one end, you're going to have your NES, your Super NES games, and then possibly whatever other games they want to throw in. That will be one subscription. Then the other piece would be getting the online play, getting the cloud backups, all that stuff would be separate. So you have 2 separate services. And even with the games, they can make that tiered as well. So maybe the NES and Super NES are one price, and then having the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance or whatever else it's going to be a different price. Ideally for me, what I would want to see them do, which probably won't happen, is they make online play free again. I know that sounds crazy, but I really think what they could do with this idea here is take their retro games, make that the subscription service, right? So I don't know, charge $20 or $30 a year for those games. Then on the other side, make online play completely free. I think that would be amazing. I don't think that's going to happen, but make the online play free, and then if you want to pay for, say, cloud backups, and I don't even know what else the service has at this point, but all the other features, make that a subscription as well. So basically anyone can play online for free. If you want retro games, you pay for your retro games. If you want cloud backups, you pay for your cloud backups. I think that would make everyone happy, but again, that's my opinion. And you might think that's dumb. I don't really want them to separate the 2 things. The reason I think that would be better is because if they start adding, Super Nintendo and Game Boy and whatever they're going to add, $20 for a whole year is going to be way too low. At least that's my opinion. I think that's way too low a price. I don't think they'll be able to keep it that low. It won't be viable. They're going to have to charge more than that. So if you start separating the 2 parts of it, having a retro Game Pass and then having the online play and everything else separate, I think that would go a lot easier for a lot of people. But what do you guys think? How do you feel about the Nintendo Switch online service as it is right now? I think one thing is clear, and that is that the service is going to be changing and evolving this year.